Who is going to man third base for the Cubs in 2025? Who's right, Boog or Steele? And we have a big announcement. All of that coming up right now here on the Setup Man. Also with the Locked On guys, Matt and Sam. Setup Nation, we have a different nation in our presence. It is the Locked On Cubs Nation. Welcome in Sam Olbur and Matt Cozzi, two very good friends who I would call allies in this Cubs community, and very excited to have you both on. It's Sunday night. Are you over your Bears loss tonight, guys?
Yeah, I was over it about 3 months ago.
Yeah, I can't say I've watched a full game since that London game in October.
And that's the last time they won, Kyle.
I thought I might get an answer like that from you guys. All right. Well, hey, by the way, Cubs fans and Setup Nation, we do have a link down below. I also appeared on Matt and Sam's show on Locked On, and we talked a little bit more in depth about filling in some pieces, where the Cubs might go with that. So definitely go check that out. It's in the description, but make sure you watch after this because we do also have a very exciting announcement. And I'm actually going to start off with that. I know we ended with that on your show, but I want to start off with that. And I am very excited to announce that we are going to be going to CubsCon and hanging out with all of you who decide they want to come. So if Sammy Sosa wasn't enough of a reason for you guys to come to CubsCon, how about Matt, Sam, and Kyle hanging out with you on the very first night? We're going to do a meetup from 4 p.m. to 5:30 right before the first night of CubsCon starts. And Matt, I know that was a time and something that you really wanted to do. Do you want to talk about it all and what you're excited about?
Yeah, I am excited, for our show to go to Cubs convention, and really just continue to meet Cubs fans, meet listeners of our show. I thought it was a great opportunity to continue to team up with the Setup Man and Setup Nation, as you call it, Kyle. I've never been to Cubs convention, so I'm really, really excited. Obviously, the news of last week with Sosa has upped that level even more. But, as we turn the page to 2025 in about 10 days, I really do think, reflecting on our time as a show, I think Sam will back me up on this in a second, we've really enjoyed our in-person experiences. We understand that this is a show that's online. YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all that stuff that we say at the end of every show. But I really think we value the in-person interaction experience. And at the end of the day, who's listening to our show? The Cubs fan. And just really excited to continue to meet more fans.
Sam, are you excited to see Sammy again, or what's one thing that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I probably would just go Matt's route. I mean, we've done 2 live shows. We've been to a few different Cub events, and then, a bunch of Cub games. And every time there's always at least 1 or 2 interactions that really stick with me for at least, like a week, where I'm just like, man, like I remember one time I was driving to the Cubs game with my mom around Mother's Day. And I was at a red light and someone just honked and rolled down the window. We weren't even close to the game yet. They're like, hey, Sam Olbur, Locked On Cubs. And I had a quick conversation with them at the light. So like those interactions are really, really cool. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of them. Probably the most we've had would be my guess at CubsCon. So that's probably what I'm most looking forward to. And then probably the Kyle Tucker embrace in that situation.
I remember last CubsCon, there was just a flurry of moves. It was Shota, and then it was the Michael Busch trade. So I just wonder if, just to continue the hype like they did last year, if we just see something happen before then. So really looking forward to that. Well, as we get into this conversation, for those of you that are listening right now, we are going to talk about the Cubs third base situation, as that is the reason that you clicked on this video or this podcast. So we're really excited to talk about that. But before we do, one thing that I'm really excited to talk to both of you about, because you ended up taking the conversation that I had with Boog about a month ago and doing a little bit of a reaction on one of your shows. And I recently, as you know, had Justin Steele on my show. And I really wanted to ask him, just because of what happened in Milwaukee in June, and how he, you know, that was kind of his pinnacle moment of the year where he screams at the dugout, "Wake the F up," right? And it was a moment, I'm putting air quotes for those of you that aren't watching on YouTube, of like, it felt like a sense of urgency of like, hey, we got to get our act together. But when I had asked Boog about that question, basically he said this, and I'm going to play this in just a second here. And I want to compare the answers of what Boog says versus what Justin Steele says and have a discussion about it. And again, just to give the context, I asked Boog, why did it seem like there was a sense of urgency later in 2024? Seemed like it was end of July versus 2023, where it was like end of June. And here's what he said.
From the fans to the media, even like to my position and the access that I get, the idea that anybody thinks they have any idea of when there is actually a sense of urgency is just false.
Okay.
Like that you're, you know, doing Blues Clues or following the breadcrumbs in terms of like now there's urgency. It doesn't work that way in this sport, man. It's like even last year there wasn't, you know, more or less urgency. I mean, I think that for Craig, it was just like, look, the players, like the guys who were not playing well have to play better. That's it. And they all knew it. There's nothing else to be done. I would say that the footballification of the way we analyze sports is such a disservice to most sports, but especially baseball. And I would further say, if the phrase sense of urgency were never used again, it would be just fine, because it's just not a thing.
Yeah, that is a good question, though, because like in the NFL, you have to have that sense of urgency from week one because you only have 17 games. With baseball, you have 162. There's going to be 10-game win streaks, 5-game losing streaks, vice versa. It's going to happen. It's just too long of a season for it not to happen. It depends on the situation. It depends on the team. I would say the past 2 years, our team has kind of hit that point where it was like we need to have a sense of urgency because we're falling behind the division. We're falling behind in the NL. We're not playing our best ball. We haven't been playing our best ball. So it's like, if we're going to do anything, we need to start doing it now. But to Boog's point, it's also not like that the entire year. Like, people, players and teams go through lulls, highs and lows. A player can be hot. He can be cold. You don't know what he's going through. So you don't want to like push a panic button and make him panic right like in April or whatever. The good teams are able to know when it is time to like, it is time to step up. Like, you know, you start looking at the rankings, the standings and everything. It's like, we're falling behind. We're not playing our best ball, but we got to find a way. So I would say both of you are right.
So Sam, I want to start with you on that one.
Yeah. I mean, Boog's answer is just, it's with all due respect, it's almost insulting.
It was worse the third time.
So look, man, like, am I plugged in like Boog is in terms of sources? Of course not. But I have sources around the league. And I've talked to people that confirm this. Like, hey, I wish our team would get up more. There's certain series we get up more. There's certain series we don't. You watch the Dodgers play the Padres in the DS. People forget they were down 2-1. You think they approached game 4 of that series the same way they approached game 1, game 2? I mean, go watch the Red Sox documentary with Theo. He talks about, man, like, we were just in this malaise. We were just in this fog. And then finally something happened. We realized we need to pick this up. Let's go. You know what I mean? And to Steele's point, nobody's saying it happens all 162. No. But there are, I mean, that would be ridiculous. That's why I would never have a job in baseball like that, because I'd be the guy going, we're 2-4 guys. We got to get it going. You know what I mean? But there's times when you look around, you go, all right, Milwaukee's all of a sudden they're 5 up. It's Memorial Day weekend, or we got to go to Milwaukee. All right, we need to crank it up a notch. This series matters more to us than it matters to them. We need to lock in. We need to be sharp. Hey, Shota, start us out. Let's lock in. We need to win this series for us. There's statements and stuff. That stuff matters. And Boog's philosophy and this new school philosophy that everything's just the same and it's so robotic. It's not the way baseball or any sport's meant to be played. Nobody's saying you need to pound the table and be crazy for all 162. All we're saying and all Steele's saying is there's a certain time that you hit in the season where you look around. The 2016 Cubs, I'll give you an example. They finished the end of the first half that year. They weren't that great. They struggled. They weren't the best team. I guarantee you there was this moment. Hey, we got to pick it up. 2017 Cubs, I think they were 5.5 out at the All-Star break. And it was like, if we don't get it going right now, if we don't crank it up, and I think they started that year, that second half in Baltimore and swept them. We're gonna let this season pass us by. Let's go. It's time to turn it on. There's a switch. It exists.
What about you, Matt?
Yeah, for me, the urgency thing is more, first of all, it's calendar related. And then secondly, it's decision-making related. You know, after the day Steele went on that, did what he did, and then returned to the dugout in that fashion, the Cubs were 39-45. My question to Boog would be, why were they 39-45? And I think an argument could be made that there was a lack of urgency in their decision-making to possibly improve the team. And you did a nice job in the original interview trying to work it back to that. You know, why is this person pitching the 8th still? Why is this person pitching the 9th? Why is this person batting there? Why is this person batting there? So I think it's more of that. You know, they went 17 games under 500 from April 27th to July 3rd. Why was that? And I think a lot of it was hamster wheel. They did the same thing. There wasn't a lot of responses in the midst of that. And coincidentally or not, a few days after that Steele thing is when they turned for the rest of the year. Because from July 4th to game 162, they had one of the best records in baseball. But they built themselves too big of a hole. It was over. It was already over.
And
well,
can I just add a couple things? First of all, Theo has said this. Like, I remember coming into the 2019 season, he was like, hey, we need to take series more seriously. Instead, when we win the first 2 on the road, let's go for a sweep instead of being satisfied, those things. You know, my mom taught me as a kid, too much of anything's not good. I don't believe the Cubs missed the postseason because of lack of urgency. I believe they missed the playoffs because their offense wasn't good enough, right? But too much of, like Matt was saying, too much of next man up, too much of, hey, let's just forget it to the next day. Too much of that is not good. Sometimes you need to say, hey, guys, it's now been a month straight of this. Let's change something. Let's figure something out. That all goes under that umbrella.
Yeah, well, and I think that's where, right, what you just said there of it's just the same thing over and over. Isn't that the definition of insanity? And I get it. I get process. I understand process, but there are exceptions to the rule. And Matt or Sam, you and I actually talked about this a couple weeks ago where it's like, yeah, okay, I get it. Adbert Alzolay had a bunch of saves the year before, but like, isn't it Craig's job or Tommy's job or someone on the coaching staff's job to be like, hey, there's something here. Like even if, let's just assume for a second, I'm completely speculating here. Let's just assume for a second that Adbert was like, no, I'm good. Everything feels good. Well, it turns out he was injured, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't there something in the film room where it's like, we have coaches here that should be able to pick up on like, no, the reason his fastball velo is down and he's not hitting his spots is because he's favoring this. Why is he favoring that? Let's ask him that direct question. Like, and maybe those things were happening, but that's where it's like, no, like there's exceptions to the rule and not Adbert Alzolay, to Boog's point, which he says in the original conversation, which I'll also link below for you guys. It's at that point, not Craig's job to figure out not Adbert Alzolay. To me, it is actually Jed's job to figure out who is the not Adbert Alzolay. And I just felt like that was the piece that I did forget to ask him is like, yeah, sure. The players, the coaches, everything, they only have so much in their control. the organization, I think, is where we get a little bit more irritated of like, why aren't you going out and finding a solution now?
Sure. I think that's fair. And, I think the Owsley thing too, like you got to look at it when things are good. When things were good, he didn't look right. And it's
Yeah.
like, you got to get out ahead of that. And I think to your point, it's organizational. Jed took responsibility. Jed needed to have more options for Craig. Hey, if Owsley doesn't pan out like he does last year, here's this and this. So it's all a trickle down effect. I just think the simple point of coming out in front of the fans and saying that urgency doesn't exist, period. These guys are human beings. You don't think that they take a series, to Matt's point with the calendar, late July versus mid-April when it's freezing outside? You think they look at those games the exact same way? Just because that makes sense and it sounds good to say, these are humans that play these games, not robots.
Yeah. Matt, one of the things that I also think when we talk about urgency is literally each of the last 2 seasons, you can look back on 1 month, maybe even 2, and say, well, that's when the season was lost. And neither of those months in either of 23 or 24 happened after June. It was May in 2023, and it was May and June in 2024. Right. So I get the calendar thing, but also like, how do we not look at that and say like, yeah, there's got to be a sense of urgency even that early on?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's important to note that it wasn't just 1 month in 2024. It was 2.
Yeah.
It was 60 plus games. And I think what we've learned from covering a baseball team now since July 5th of 2022 every day, I think good teams can have a bad 30-game pocket, but a 60-game pocket, it doesn't exist for the good teams. And so what we learned in 2023 was, hey, this team had some good stretches. They were alive until that last week of the year, but they didn't quite do enough. And maybe they were even a little bit ahead of themselves. What we learned in 2024 was, especially after that 30-game pocket the previous year, wow, this is a lot worse because the 24 team had a way worse stretch than the 23 team and then some. So I think you could mitigate it to a 30-game pocket. Check out the Dodgers, check out the Yankees. They did have that. Maybe it was 13 and 17 or 12 and 18 or 14 and 16, but they still had it. And they went to the last game of the year. But the 60-game pocket, that's unheard of for a team that's trying to be serious.
And Kyle, you just mentioned it, right? The fact that it was early in the year, because it was early in the year, they didn't show a ton of urgency. It's the whole point. Yeah. And so that's the whole point is, hey, earlier in the year, hey guys, it's not just June Dansby. Let's crank it up a notch.
Well, and I don't think there's any coincidence that as soon as you trade -11 outs above average Christopher Morel at third base, that the Cubs suddenly really even start taking off more. And I'm not saying Isaac Paredes saved this team, but I will say that when you look at July, when they went 13 and 12, and then in August, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was great. I want to say it was like 18 and 9 or something like that. It was a really good August. And one of the biggest differences was your third base was a different situation. And no, Isaac Paredes didn't play great defense. There's a study done in business that like if you change the lights in a corporate office, improvement, like all this production improvement starts to go up. And the reason that they have kind of correlated to is just because the owners are actually giving attention to a specific thing as small as the lights. And the way I look at that in baseball is if a owner or a GM are trying to make changes, then the guys around them start to see like, oh, like these guys care. Like they want us to go out there and win. And that's what I kind of boil it down to. I don't know. I might be thinking too much into that, but I don't think that was a coincidence, I guess is what I'm saying there, Sam.
Well, and how about the Kyle Tucker trade?
Yeah.
Right. I do think the 60 games had a lot to do with offense. The bullpen is at fault. Again, a lot of these convos that we have about the Cubs, it's like, what's the Cubs' biggest problem? Not a great conversation to have. That means there's multiple problems that need to be solved. But that's where I'm optimistic about the Kyle Tucker trade is, well, can this one guy have this impact across the entire sequence of the order. And people might come back at me and say, well, Matt, it's only one player. Exactly. They haven't had that for over 2 years or more.
Yeah.
And you could already see it. The computer is already favoring that.
Yep.
Have you seen the FanGraphs projections?
Yeah, 86.5. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Well, that's FanDuel, and
FanDuel.
FanGraphs has the Cubs about 86, 87. Actually, if you account for Zip's full season, they have him at 90.
Oh, hey-o.
And they
One
made
player.
a couple of moves so far, a couple of moves, namely Kyle Tucker.
So speaking of that, and speaking of third base, let's talk about the Cubs' third base situation. I mainly want to talk about this one because of the options that are out there, or lack thereof, and then Matt Shaw. What do you think is more likely to happen, Sam? Matt Shaw playing third base opening day, or Nico Horner being traded away, Matt Shaw playing second base, and this is, by the way, assuming that Nico is healthy either way, and some other guy via trade or free agent comes in to play third?
Oh, that's a tough one. So I'm going to answer it. I'll preface it by saying this. Even if Nico Horner stays, I still think the Cubs are going to add insurance for Matt Shaw because, as you just mentioned earlier, one of the biggest reasons they struggled early on in the year was what they got from Christopher Morel at third base. Remember, he was horrendous defensively, not to pick on him, and he didn't hit either. Now, Matt Shaw is a much better defensive third baseman going into this year than Morel was. But I think the lesson learned there is you can't just throw everything into a young player like that. You have to have some insurance, some veteran backup, especially now because you're on a 1-year plan here with Kyle Tucker, as far as we know. To answer your question, I think the most likely thing would be Nico to stay and Shaw to play there at third because, just off of math, but I really am passionate and assertive in the fact that the Cubs need to have another veteran presence there because I like Matt Shaw. I think I would go as far as to say I've liked him as much, if not more than anybody that I've heard. And I think he's going to be great, but you can't just throw all that out there and go, okay, there's no real backup plan, whatever. So I think the third base plan, actually, it's not as complicated as people think. You just said it. If Nico gets traded, Shaw moves over to second, and the Cubs go get a major guy there, like a real stabilizer every day. Yeah. If Horner stays, I think the Cubs go get more of a stopgap veteran where it's like, we really want, as Jed said, we want Shaw to take this job and run with it, and we want this said guy to be a utility guy. But just in case, Matt has some problems there, maybe he doesn't throw the ball well, maybe he's struggling offensively, we still have that insurance policy there.
So, Matt, I'm going to list off the free agents here, and I want to ask you which you think they're most likely to sign at third base if you were to say either Nico or Shaw or just going to stay at second and we got to figure out third base. And I want to know two things. One, if you think it's going to be one of these guys I'm listing, or two, if you think it's going to be more likely in a trade. So we got Alex Bregman, who is a part of my tinfoil hat theory, Josh Rojas, Johan Moncada, JD Davis, John Birdie, Paul DeYoung, who is listed as a shortstop, but I would see him more at third base, and Jose Iglesias, who is interesting. That would be interesting.
Yeah, I would say I think the Red Sox are going to sign Alex Bregman, and they're going to move Devers to first, and then trade Casas and a package to the Mariners for Castillo.
Oh, you thought about this?
I think Josh Rojas is the name there. He's on my notepad. He's lefty hitter. He got over 120 games at third last year for the Mariners.
If it is him, do you see that being the everyday third baseman, or you see that being kind of like a quasi he and Matt Shaw sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it's going to be him and Shaw.
Okay.
I don't think they made the Tucker trade without feeling really good about Shaw at third. And I think they do expect him to make, this leap to the major leagues as a third baseman. I would be surprised to see Horner traded at this stage. I'd be surprised if they brought in a third baseman via trade. And just like last year with PCA, I do think Shaw's going to get some runway. And I think he's going to get it out of opening day.
And regardless of how they feel about Shaw and how we feel, they need another infielder anyway. So,
they do.
Like, and with all due respect to Mastro, I think, you know, they need somebody else that could play over there regularly. Right. So even if they do go get a Josh Rojas, that doesn't really mean anything. Oh, how they feel about Shaw over there. You need another guy anyway. They don't have enough guys right now.
Especially if Horner's hurt, because then Shaw will open the season at second. That person will play third that first 10 games.
And if they didn't move on from Madrigal, that would be his role. Madrigal, it would be back to what it was, in 23, where it's just like, hey, we're gonna lock in on Madrigal's defense. He's gonna bat ninth when Shaw doesn't play. So you would assume they're gonna look for a guy that's a step up from him.
Yeah.
Now, for those that are out there that love the prospects and are saying, well, why wouldn't you just have Triantos or like Luis Vasquez be that other guy? Is the reason that you're thinking that way just because of the veteran presence?
Yeah, Matt, you take that one.
Not necessarily. I really think they need to upgrade the bench, and they need to upgrade the role players. I don't think a rookie should be a role player, and or a top prospect should be a role guy or like a six man,
because they need the
rep. I think they could do way better than Luis Vasquez or Mastro.
Yeah, it's just like that sounds great. Like everyone, that sounds great. But these guys, it's the same concept as, hey, why doesn't Michael Busch just play third before the Bellinger trade? That sounds great. But these guys see these guys every day. They know what they can do. You know, if Luis Vasquez was a serious option, he probably would have gotten more run at that spot. So I just think you just went out and made a statement to the major leagues of, we just traded for Kyle Tucker for 1 year, so we need to win this division. And so I just don't think you could leave any major holes. And I think ultimately Matt Shaw will take this job and run with it if Nico Horner's a second baseman. But insurance policies, you have the money, go get a nice solid veteran where, hey, you know what? Shaw just needs a week. He just needs a mental break. He's struggling a little bit. Boom, you slide this guy in and he could, he can carry the club. He can be really good.
All right, I'm going to give you two hypotheticals, and I want to know which one you think is more likely, or you can go the route of which one would excite you more. Let's assume for a second that this trade finally happens that's been talked about for feels like a couple of years now, of Nico to the Mariners, and they get some sort of starting pitcher back, which at this point, I don't know how realistic that is, but let's just assume something like that happens and Nico is traded.
Yeah.
There are two third basemen, because then Matt Shaw goes over to second. There are two third basemen one via trade and one via free agency that really intrigue me for that full-time third base position, and it's a little bit outside the box. Number one, we've kind of heard about it, Bo Bichette, right? Those have kind of surfaced back up. I think Bleacher Nation just said something the other day about that. He had a really poor 2024. Maybe you can go and grab him at his lowest value in his career so far for a not so high package. Who knows? But that feels like a potential third baseman. How about Ha-Seong Kim? He's a shortstop, but man, like, he's played second base, so why wouldn't he play third base? That is a legit glove, and he's a really good hitter too. He's not gonna be your third hitter or anything, but he's a good, probably 5 or 6 hole hitter. And then it moves. And what I love about that, just to your point, Matt, Kyle Tucker, like a good closer, just moved the setup man from the 9th inning back to the 8th inning, yada yada yada. Now we get Dansby and Bush, instead of them batting 4th and 5th, maybe they're batting 5th and 6th, and it just changes the whole lineup. So which one do you like better? I'm gonna go with you first, Sam.
Yeah, I've thrown out Ha-Seong Kim's name before because I like him a lot. I just don't know how comfortable he is playing third. Same with Bichette, but in this scenario, if we were to trade Nico and somebody for a starter, and then get one of those two guys to play third, I would be really excited. Probably Bichette would excite me a little more, just because I think he's a great player that had a really bad season. I don't think Hassan Kim's a great player. I think he's a nice player. I think Bo Bichette has shown in the past that he could be a great baseball player. He was a 5-6 WAR player in 2021, if I remember correctly. So I would probably go that route, but either would be, I'd be very happy.
I would say Bo Bichette hands down. I would be a little bit, not that I have trepidation about investing in Kim, but I don't really think they need to make an investment of that type offensively right now. As hard as maybe as weird as that sounds, given their struggles last year, but they already have acquired Kyle Tucker. I think they're lining up, all the bags of money, position player wise, for him. And so a 1-year rental like Bichette at third, probably at a lower cost, that's good. I like it.
I think Bichette,
especially if Horner's traded.
I think Bichette so he's got 1 year. Does he have 1 year left? And what's he making, like $16 million?
According to Spotrac, we've got a $17.5 million for 2025, and then he's a free agent in 26, so 1 year left.
So he's making $6 million more than Horner.
Yeah. I mean, the only difference there is years of control, and then he goes out and has a great. Now you got that situation, right, that a lot of people have been talking about. Well, you can't have too many guys that need extensions after 2025 because you're trying to pitch Tucker on an extension. So,
I like both. I like both the names.
All right, cool. Guys, we're gonna wrap this thing up, but just a reminder. First night of CubsCon. Hope you guys will be there. If you're listening in, come and do a meetup with me, Matt, and Sam from Locked On from 4 to 5:30, right there on the first floor of the Grand Sheraton Hotel.
Take some photos.
Yeah, let's do it. What's the name of that bar? Do you remember, Matt?
Shy, CHI bar.
Shy bar. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So that's where we're gonna be at. Come take photos, shake some hands, kiss some babies. We'll do all of that.
Yep.
Guys, thanks so much for jumping on, and can't wait to see you in Chicago.